Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and greetings to you all from Vienna, Austria. My name is Mikael Melin, and I work for Sustainable Energy for All. SEforALL, in short, is an international organization working together with the United Nations, with governments, private sector, philanthropy, civil society, and partners to drive further, farther, faster action towards the achievement of SDG 7. And that is all about clean, affordable, and reliable energy for all, in line with the goals set in the Paris Agreement. Today, I have the pleasure of being the moderator of a session focusing on the opportunities for action on clean cooking. I can assure you, friends, that it's going to be a very informative session. We have a good lineup of speakers, a lot of knowledge squeezed in to a session of 1.5 hours, which I'm sure you're going to be enjoying a lot. Now, we all know the challenge on clean cooking globally. There's 2.4 billion people without access to clean cooking. That's 1/3 of this world's population currently. The smoke in the kitchens is a killer. It kills and claims millions of lives every year. And that smoke, of course, affects women, babies, and children most. But not having access to clean cooking also affects the planet. It causes mass deforestation as trees are chopped down for cooking fuel. And yes, there's a lot of CO2 and carbon emissions too, and a lot of it. On finance, very little has happened to date. At SEforALL, we conducted some research called the Energizing Finance Research, and that shows that clean cooking commitments or finance flowing to the 20 priority countries of this world facing the biggest challenge in absolute numbers of people not having access to clean cooking only hovered around $130 million a year. That's far below the needed 4.5 billion that is estimated to be needed in investments every year for us to meet SDG 7 on clean cooking by 2030. Now, this session is not about the challenges and about that negative side of the story, but this session is really about reversing this story and showcase the many opportunities that lie ahead of us on a clean cooking transition pathway. The benefits, of course, are many. Number one must emphasize health for people, gender benefits more broadly, certainly, environmental benefits, but there's also many economic benefits, business, jobs, investments, and by formalizing the sector, tax revenues to governments. The good side of things is also that the cleaner cooking alternatives, especially in the urban and peri-urban settings, are now already becoming much cheaper than the traditional ways of cooking. So this also generates savings at the household level. Finally, electricity for cooking is finally making it on the radar. And this certainly is a no-brainer in many settings. And a homegrown solution when it comes to providing access to clean cooking also obviously improves energy security of countries. So I'm really excited about this session this morning, which I have the pleasure of moderating, because really I think it's starting to be widely felt now among partners that the clean cooking transition really is at our fingertips. So today we'll have many sessions. We'll have a run of a few presentations, and at the end there's going to be ample time for questions, answers, and some discussions among the presenters and participants of this session. So with these very short remarks, I really now have the pleasure of introducing to our host, Dr. Nam from the Asian Development Bank, being a close partner, of course, of SEforALL as well, and a champion on SDG 7 in the Asia Pacific. So Dr. Nam, with these short words of introduction, I'll pass you the floor now and the microphone for your opening remarks before we proceed with the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikael. Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me very well. So, Clean Energy Partners, distinguished speakers and workshop participants, good afternoon in Manila time. Welcome to this deep dive workshop entitled opportunity for action, clean cooking solutions. Significant progress has been achieved in electrification in terms of energy access, but the pace of the access to clean cooking is lagging so much behind. And as mentioned by Mikhail already, around 1.57, almost 1.6 billion people in Asia and the Pacific, which is roughly slightly below 35% of the region's population, which is a statistic from 2019, still rely on highly polluting cooking solutions. The use of traditional biomass cook stoves is immensely detrimental on human health, especially for women and children. And World Health Organization, WHO, estimates close to 4 million premature deaths yearly due to illnesses attributable to household air pollution from inefficient cooking practices. Universal access to clean cooking therefore needs urgent action to realize amongst three important sustainable goals: that of affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy service for all, SDG Goal 7, healthy lives and well-being for all, SDG Goal 3, and readiness to combat climate change and its impact, SDG Goal 13. The ADB's 2021 energy policy has incorporated increased support to clean cooking in its agenda. But to gain traction, many barriers must be overcome, among which are the lack of policy and information, the need to develop or deploy appropriate technologies, cultural biases, and insufficient financing. ADB has supported various clean energy initiatives to serve as a basis for policy interventions at the local level. There were some pilot projects in People's Republic of China and Mongolia to assess the technology option that can replace traditional biomass and coal to mitigate indoor air pollution. And in case of the Philippines, a study was conducted examining the impact of cooking practices on indoor air quality, traditional cook stoves, and fuels, that the costs associated with their use, including suitable technology options to improve cooking efficiency and reduce pollution. The goal of today's workshop is to show opportunities for action in the clean cooking space. Our speakers will discuss the benefits of transitioning to clean cooking, present a snapshot of the clean cooking industry, and showcase the successful business models on modern clean cooking technologies, such as e-cooking. Finally, Sustainable Energy for All will discuss how to scale up the clean cooking access through evidence-based decision-making and integrated approach to energy access planning. We do hope this workshop will provide us new insights on what can be implemented, especially by the private sector, and what opportunities can ADB support to scale up and facilitate rapid adoption of clean cooking technologies. Finally, we would like to thank you all for your interest in clean cooking access, an issue at the core of people's daily lives. To our speakers and our co-organizer, SEforALL, and partner organizations, Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, ESMAP from World Bank, Clean Cooking Alliance, and Modern Energy Cooking Services, MEX, we appreciate your support. We look forward to a fruitful discussion today, hoping this will lead to concrete actions for cleaner and more resilient Asia and the Pacific. Thank you. With that, I will turn over to Mikhail. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nam. Thank you, Dr. Nam, for those opening remarks. And with that, we'll move fast forward. And then first of all, foremost, I have the pleasure now to invite Dr. Yabei Shang, who's a passionate professional from the World Bank and leading the World Bank's Clean Cooking Fund. And in her presentation, she will really be spotlighting now what the clean cooking planning tool that has just recently been launched. How can that help accelerate and spotlight the many benefits of this clean cooking transition? So with that, Yabe, the floor is yours. Oh, thank you.
Can you see me? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and it's great pleasure to be part of this deep dive workshop. So let me start to talk about the current status of access to clean cooking in Asia. So based on the latest SDG 7 tracking report, Asia has made great progress over the last 2 decades. And you see it's basically the driver of the global access rate, particularly for East Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. The steady decrease of the number of people without access to clean cooking fuel and solutions. Still, the access agenda is certainly not finished yet. So 1.3 billion people still lack access to clean cooking in Asia, accounting 54% of global access deficit in 2020. So this is costing the region $2.7 billion each year. And it's driven by adverse impacts on health, gender, and climate, as also mentioned during the introduction. And in particular, the South Asia is leading the most cost of inaction. So before I present cost and benefits of transitioning to clean cooking, let me first clarify what clean cooking solutions we are talking about. So at the World Bank, we developed this multi-tier framework that use multiple attributes and to classify cooking solutions. So broadly, we classify cooking services into 3 categories. So no access, called tier 0 or to 1. So basically it's a traditional cooking with open fire, 3 stone stoves, and rely on traditional biomass solid fuel. And then input cooking category, it's basically MTF tier 2 to 3. And mainly use input cook stoves without changes of fuel. And then the third category we call modern cooking. So that is fit into MTF tier 4 to 5. That's really about modern cooking that require modern cooking appliance with clean cooking fuel, such as biogas, LPG, ethanol, electricity, and natural gas, or forced air gasifier with pellets. So clear, you see that a different level of cooking services will have different costs, of course, have different benefits and impacts. And we see clearly from modern cooking, it requires more of investment, and not only stove appliance, but also fuel cost, basically operating cost, and also require downstream infrastructure investment to enable the modern fuel market functional. But of course, the benefits will also be high, which I will discuss shortly. Then now, before I present the results, let me introduce the clean cooking planning tool that Mika also mentioned about. So recently we launched this top-down scenario-based planning tool, covers 71 developing countries with high access deficit. So the tool will help decision makers and planners to explore and identify transition pathways for achieving universal access to clean cooking by 2030. The tool follows the cooking energy classifications I just mentioned. And for any selected country or region, users can view the state of access to cooking energy services for the baseline year of 2020. The 2030, this is a Euro scenario, the cost of inaction, the current policy and the regulatory environment. And then that user can select a transition pathways by deciding how many urban and rural households should be transitioned to modern cooking energy services or improved cooking services by 2030. So the two will then calculate the estimated investment costs and the benefits based on the user selected transition pathway. So the estimated investment costs include the household contribution to the switching cost, public subsidies to fill in the affordability gap, and private investment in downstream infrastructure to make the modern cooking market functional. So here's the link. I encourage you to take a look of the two. And now here are the results for Asia at the region. So we see that the results include basically two scenarios. One, the scenario is universal access to improved cooking, as mentioned, tier 2, tier 3. And then another scenario is universal access to modern cooking by 2030. For example, for South Asia, it requires 2.4 billion per year to achieve universal access to improved cooking and 43 billion per year to achieve universal access to modern cooking. And the resulting benefits are also quite different. For improved cooking, it will lead 180 billion benefits per year, while for modern cooking, it will lead over 900 billion benefits per year. So across different sub-regions and scenarios, the benefits to cost ratio is between 20 to 90. So you could try this tool and explore the transition pathway for the country you're interested in and get the estimated cost and the benefits of the transition pathway you selected. So this tool is just give you a basic narrative on why investing in clean cooking makes economic sense. But how do we do it? How we can actually help country to transit? I want to share some examples from World Bank. So first example is China Hebei Air Pollution Prevention and Control Project. So at the beginning, the source analysis showed that the residential use of solid fuels, including biomass and coal, contributes to more than 32% of overall air pollution measured in PM 2.5 emissions in the region. And the World Bank prepared a 500 million Hebei air pollution prevention and control project, which includes an 80 million clean stove component using the results-based financing approach. The project helped 1.2 million households to replace coal stoves with gas and electric heating and cooking appliances, and helped reduce PM 2.5 emissions by 5,000 tons. So the second example I want to show is Bangladesh Rural Electrification and Renewable Energy Development Project 2. SMAP helped to scale up the improved cooking component by mobilizing 20 million grant from Green Climate Fund. And then together with 20 million World Bank ADB financing, the project aims to help 4 million households to access to improved cooking solutions. And the project's ongoing is already reached 2.3 million households. And then that reduced the CO2 emissions by 3 million tons. There are also examples like Law PDR is still ongoing, utilize the CDF carbon finance to purchase carbon credits that are generated from the Clean Stone Initiative in Law PDR up to 5.2 million carbon credits. One last example is that the random energy access and the quality improved project that outside Asia region, but it utilizes a pro-poor results-based financing approach that link to incentives to the income categories and also technical performance of different cooking solutions. And we're also preparing the carbon finance to purchase carbon credits generated from the cooking operation and then reflow back to the RBF to make it revolving. Finally, as about lessons learned, we see that the access to clean cooking is a development issue faced by the poor. A national program with high level support and a sizable investment is key to scale up access to clean cooking. Incentive will be needed to achieve universal access to clean cooking. A system approach is needed when promoting access to clean cooking. And the local innovation and the contextualized solutions are critical for the long-term sustainability. And RBF can be an effective approach. It has been a main operations model for the World Bank operations. If I still have time, maybe I can just quickly mention what is the Clean Cooking Fund. We are here to help countries to accelerate progress toward achieving universal access to clean cooking by co-finance with World Bank and other MDBs investment, and to promote innovations and to link incentives with results at output, outcome, and impact levels. And we aim to utilize 500 million funding to catalyze another 2 billion investment in the field. And we operate in 2 pillars. One is investment pillar, another is about knowledge, innovation, and policy coordination. And as I mentioned, we recently launched this clean cooking planning tool that hope that help you to explore the transition pathways and start a dialogue how to mobilize resources and develop programs to access to clean cooking solutions. So finally, I would just leave one framework. Okay, how can really accelerate access to clean cooking? We use a heart, hand, head approach and 5 I actions. Heart is put people at the center, and then using our head to develop national strategies and roadmaps, and then focus on results-based and results-oriented implementation. And really, in terms of actions, is focus on integration. Access to clean cooking should not be an afterthought or separate operation from the overall energy transition and the economic development. And inclusiveness, ensure that everyone is included, no one is leaving behind, and focus on impacts and innovation. And finally, what really make difference is to ensure to scale up investments. With that, thank you very much. Yeah, back to you, Mikhail.
Thank you very much, Yabe. Thank you very much for that rich presentation. And yes, the presentations will be available to the audience after the session as well. But what is quite striking indeed is that the visual that you showed, that the benefits by so far exceed the investments needs in the sector. So it really is a no-brainer to help now really raise ambition, prioritize clean cooking, put together the right policies, regulations, and incentive schemes, and the plans and the systems that will certainly then drive investment and impact at the end. So thank you, Yabe, for that. The next speaker is from the Clean Cooking Alliance, and the Clean Cooking Alliance really is at the forefront when it comes to driving consumer demand, investments, and really supporting partners across the sector, both existing and new ones, including governments, to help put clean cooking at the top of the agendas. And Ronan Ferguson is the senior manager. He's calling in from Somerset, I believe, and he's the private sector and investments manager, and also the lead author of the Clean Cooking Industry Snapshot report, which I'm pleased to say is fresh from the oven, was released only a few weeks ago. And so With that short introduction, Ronan, you'll tell us what the findings from the snapshot report this year show.
Yes, indeed, Mikhail. Thank you so much for that introduction. And hello, everyone. Good day. I'm Ronan Ferguson. I'm a senior manager in CCA's market strengthening team. And as Mikhail points out, I was the lead author for this year's industry snapshot report. And I intend to give you a quick tour through highlighting some of the main findings from this year's report. I hope that the next 10 minutes are useful to you all, just to learn some of the broad trends across the clean cooking sector. I'll spend a little bit of time spotlighting around carbon finance. Before we begin in earnest, it is just worth just outlining the main parameters of the report to you. This report majors on showing the sector's capital flows and enterprise-based operational revenues. And whilst it has a global remit, it focuses on the formal and for-profit clean cooking industry. So artisanal manufacturers, which are large in number, but often small in revenues, are not represented here in this report. In terms of whose data is in the report, clearly we'd love to get a fully exhaustive representation of the for-profit clean cooking sector, but we have the investment and operational performance of about 60 clean cooking companies for 2020, and that data was collected in the latter half of 2021. Now, this is the third edition of the snapshot. And we actually combined this 2020 data with those from the previous two versions of the snapshot. So we've got an analysis that covers 2014 through to 2020. Okay, well, let's start by talking about capital flows. CCA tracked almost 61 million going into 32 companies in 2020. And that's actually the second highest amount of capital that we've tracked going into ventures on record. The record year was 2019, and that was really boosted by a $25 million equity deal, which remains the single largest one that we've tracked in the clean cooking sector. Without that deal, 2019 and 2018 would have actually looked pretty similar, and there was no similar sized kind of marquee deal in 2020. So as such, the 2020 numbers are something of a reversion to the mean. From this chart, you can also make out the different types of capital that the sector is attracting. 60% of the investment tracked in 2020 was equity. And in fact, equity has been the main type of investment coming into the sector for the past 6 straight years. And when you look at the past 2 years combined, almost 9 out of every $10 going into clean cooking companies seeks some kind of return on investment through debt or through equity. Grants have been the smallest type of capital deployed in clean cooking, and that's been the case for 5 straight years. Now, I appreciate that this picture shows up to 2020, and we don't show 2021 or 2022 on here, but it is worth flagging that the amount of capital that's been raised in the first half of 2022 alone is more than double that which was reported for 2020. Which is exciting. Is this finally the inflection point? Well, I hope so. But in this picture, what I've done is shrunk down that previous bar chart and put it in the bottom left of a new chart, where you can see it set in the context of the funding that is required to achieve universal access to clean cooking by 2030. So those dark blue bars are, like little ants marching towards 2030 there. And whilst they've been growing on a compounded basis at 20% per year between 2014 and 2020, you can see that even if we continue that rate of growth, which is shown by the pale blue line there, which of course is by no means guaranteed, that investment in clean cooking will still not be in the realm of billions of dollars of investment per year. Mikhail, in his opening remarks, referenced the SEforALL's excellent Energizing Finance Understanding the Landscape 2021 report, and that's the source of this $4.5 billion number per year as what's being needed by clean cooking to achieve universal access in time for 2030. And it's just quite the chasm between where we're at, the little blue bars, and where we need to be, the yellow dashed line at the top there. And we're just not close to being on track. But what is interesting is that new capital investment has been concentrating in ever fewer companies. And if you look back to 2014, it took 18 companies to account for 90% of the funding that year. But if you fast forward to 2020, just 7 companies raised more than 90% of the total investment. And that's interesting because, recall back to that previous slide, you can see that the absolute volume of investment has been increasing. So more dollars going into fewer companies. 4 of these 7 companies were also among the 8 companies that you can see that recorded 90% of the capital in 2019. So it is fair to say that capital is concentrating in fewer and now bigger companies. But what does that mean? Well, this may indicate that investor confidence is increasing in a few business models, but there may still be some lack of evidence for the commercial opportunity that would prompt replication of those business models to international scale. Let's move on to talk about sales revenues and carbon revenues. To analyze how clean cooking sales revenues have been performing over time, what CCA did was collate consistent set of sales records for 32 clean cooking companies over that 2014 to 2020 period. And I should say from the outset, one of the largest players in the sector didn't disclose their revenues or carbon data to us. So that means that the data I'm presenting here is a known underrepresentation of the true aggregate amount. All right, well, sales and operations. In this chart, we've stacked revenues from clean cooking sales, revenues from grants and RBFs, and revenues from carbon credit sales all together. When you look at it all stacked up, you can see that revenues have largely remained flat year on year, remaining with a pretty stable range between $38 to $41 million. However, when you look at the dark blue parts of those bars, revenues from clean cooking sales have been declining for 3 years in a row. In 2020, they fell by 13%. But these declines in revenues have been offset by continued rapid growth in carbon finance. This report we've released highlights the huge growth in carbon financing that an increasing number of companies have enjoyed in recent years. In fact, since 2017, the amount of carbon finance we've been tracking has increased 21-fold. Basically, carbon credit sales have gone as a source of revenue from 1% of the total in 2017 to 29% of the total in 2019. So, excuse me, in 2020. And the increasing in carbon revenues have been driven by 2 factors. 1, the number of companies that are receiving carbon credit revenue, and 2, the size of the associated carbon credit deals. So, of the 27 companies responding to our survey, 7 reported revenue from carbon credits. And that's double the proportion reporting revenues from carbon credits in 2017. And that shift you can see with the dark blue line on the chart. By looking at the increases in the lighter blue bars from year to year, you can see the average carbon credit sales reported have increased by approximately $500,000 each year between 2017 and 2020. So to reach just over $1.5 million in 2020. So it seems like the sector is in this early stages of a positively reinforcing cycle where carbon revenue provides private investors with a means of accessing larger returns from their investments and more quickly. And that de-risks the return-seeking investments in those companies that are well positioned to generate carbon revenues. I'd like to finish with a couple of emerging trends. And the first one, very much related to that carbon story, which is the growth in metered cooking devices and remote data collection. So one of the key blockers that prevents companies from accessing carbon revenues is expensive validation methodologies. Work is ongoing to reduce the transaction cost of accessing carbon finance, specifically much more interest now in metered cooking devices and remote data collection that provides timely and accurate data for the monitoring, reporting, verification activities on which all RBF programming really depends. But it's not just the RBF side that benefits from this, it's also metering technologies that are very important for offering consumers pay-go solutions, and that can help overcome affordability barriers. The second trend, enterprises diversifying across fuel types. Well, I'll leave this one for Ben, really. We'll hear from Ben, CEO of ATEC International, around the launch of the patented pay-go product range of eCook last year, and how that followed on the back of a successful launch of pay-go biogas. The third trend around adjacent sectors expanding into clean cooking. Well, The emergence of electric cooking as a viable proposition for customers, that's really exciting because it could draw large utilities, mini-grid developers, solar home system providers into clean cooking. Now, Dr. Simon Batchelor of the MEX program is on next, and he'll be covering promising business models on e-cooking. So I'll leave that for him to expand on as a trend. With that, thank you so much for your attention. You can download the industry snapshot report by this QR code or on CCA's website, which is at cleancooking.org. Thanks so much. Mikhail, I'll pass back to you.
Thank you very much, Rona, for that presentation. I mean, it is indeed eye-opening to see where we were in 2020 and also your reflections on where we are heading and the new capital that's flowing into the space, which certainly is very encouraging. New capital in the form of investments indeed, because what one could see from the visuals is that the share of grants, that line remains horizontal, and while grants certainly being important, and there's innovation like Yabe spoke about larger scaled resource-based financing schemes, the new capital in terms of equity, debt, and other financial mechanisms certainly are going to be key for us to meet the targets. So very interesting insights on the carbon finance and those revenues that provide more revenues from the traditional sales aspects of cooking stoves and solutions only. So with that, thank you, Ronan. And now I have a pleasure of introducing Simon. I think Simon in this space is really a champion, or perhaps even a revolutionary. He's with the Modern Energy Cooking Services program, and his presentation indeed is quite eye-opening because it will show what the opportunity is in terms of e-cooking, which now is making it on everybody's radars. For too long, it was brushed away, but not for long, as we will hear from Simon. So with that, Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. Yes, well, you've already done my opening slide, which is that, and it's not moving on, sorry, let me just, because it was about that brushing away of electricity, and I think we have a fantastic new opportunity. We've talked about how energy access generally has improved, and we've also talked in the rest of the ACEF conference about how we need to get to net zero carbon, that Asia in particular, the plenary was all about 4 trillion needs to be invested. And these are very large numbers. And we heard from Ronan just now that, the investment in clean cooking per se is relatively small. We heard from Yabe that we need billions. And I think my argument is that actually those billions are being invested. They just don't look like clean cooking yet. So I've got this headline. If we are around 670 million who don't have electricity, mainly Africa, and we have something like, we've heard different figures even today, 2.4 billion, 3 billion is sometimes, and indeed Yabe has produced a report called State of Modern Energy Access to Cooking. And if we want to get people to modern energy access, that's 4 billion that still need. And we heard from Dr. Namler, the 1.6 billion is in Asia. Well, by implication, that gap, there's 2 billion people who have electricity, but don't use it as their primary cooking fuel. I suspect that most of our audience has a rice cooker, and there are new energy efficient appliances which really make this a viable possibility even for the poor. Just before I get on to the actual food and the cooking, this is another aspect I like to draw people's attention to, which is the urbanization. We often think of deforestation as a rural problem, but actually it's around market towns, around small towns. You get this zone of deforestation that is happening. These are pictures from Kenya, but the same would be true for many of the Asian countries where basically the collection of wood, and sometimes in some cases the charcoal, is really causing massive deforestation. And so even the IPCC this year talked about the increasing efficiency improvements in electric cooking could enable households to shift to electric cooking at mass scale. And that reminds me, just on my previous slide, you know, we always talk about 7.1, the access, so access to electricity, access to clean cooking, but there's 7.2, renewable energy, that commitment by Asia to move towards net zero, because it's 50% of global emissions at the moment. There will be huge investment in renewable energy, which is cheaper than new fossil fuel-based power stations. And there will be improvements in energy efficiency. The devices, the electric pressure cooker that I'm talking about in the rest of my presentation, only been around since 2010. And the core company that has promoted it, Instant Pot, talks about a hockey stick curve of sales happening around 2015-16. So these are new opportunities, in the same way that the LED light bulb has changed the way we how much we consume in lighting. So too, these new appliances offer us great opportunity here. Dr. Nam said about not messing with people's food. I think he framed it politely as there are cultural consequences. And what I want to draw attention to is that we have spent a lot of time looking at how people's taste of food is affected when they're trying to cook with electricity. And the electric pressure cooker, which is on the market globally, does actually offer huge opportunities in cleanliness, not just the household air pollution, but in terms of physical cleanliness, in terms of being able to switch it on and walk away safely. The kids can't knock it over. There's all sorts of considerable opportunities there. And so what we've done in about 12 to 14 countries now is a series of research that starts with the taste of the food and cooking the food, how much energy to cook the food, but to make sure it is actually appropriate for the situation. And you can see that we've got Myanmar, we've got Nepal. I just picked on a couple of the Asian ones. We had India, and you'll see that in Nepal, the electric pressure cooker comes in at about half the cost for a meal. We're not talking about the hypothetical boiling of water. We're talking about cooking a full meal by real cooks, so that it's not a laboratory controlled, let's get the energy efficiency down as much as possible. But this is replicated in real life. You can see that there are comparisons. This is again from the India cookbook with subsidized LPG. And it can hold its own with subsidized LPG at the current cost of electricity. And that, of course, potentially releases the government from having to find that subsidy. As you probably know, India spends between $5 and $8 billion a year on subsidizing LPG. Nepal spends a lot on subsidizing LPG, as does Indonesia. I believe it's around 3 billion. All of that could be pivoted. It's about integrating the planning and pivoting that into using all these electrical wires that we've already putting a lot of effort into getting into people's houses, using that for the clean cooking element, bringing it all together. And then you will hear a debate within the e-cooking sector between electric pressure cookers and induction cookers. And in fact, my colleague Ben will present about the induction cookers after this. Yes, the debate is open. Induction cookers are much more flexible in terms of cooking your meal, but they are not quite as efficient as an electric pressure cooker. So the ideal is one of each. In terms of the benefits, we've done these calculations where if we could just pivot 40% of Nepal's grid connected, so they already have a wire into their house. If they were the firewood users, if 40% of the firewood users already grid connected were pivoted to electricity, then you would get these benefits. You'd have massive health benefits. You'd have some changes to the deforestation, etc. I'll leave you to read the slide. Sorry, it's information-rich slide, but you know, the slides will be distributed afterwards. Again, Nicolina is going to speak after Ben, and she will talk about SEforALL's integrated planning tool. And I wanted to pick up on this particular one from Nigeria. And you see that in terms of government investment, again, my point is we have invested billions in electricity. So for the last 4 years, 54 billion in India, $1 billion, in South Asia, 32 billion, to strengthen and improve electricity. It takes very little to get appliances that can then utilize that electricity for clean cooking. And at the same time, it's a actual saving for the household. So you're pivoting expenditure on polluting fuels into clean cooking. And the talk was supposed to be about business models. I probably haven't quite left myself enough time on that. But in one sense, it's about just making sure that that upfront cost is covered in some ways. And that can be done through the standard credit facilities using saving and credit organizations. You can indeed do pay as you go, as Ben will describe in a moment. And we're getting utilities involved because in a place like Uganda, there's actually surplus electricity and they want to increase the demand. I've been told I have 30 seconds left. So there are also finance options, as alluded to by Ronan, for ongoing finance of the reduction of the fuel costs, and that includes the lifeline tariffs for the electricity, the carbon finance, and the results-based finance that Yabe was talking about. All of this matches the loads, the demand, supply and demand curves for the grid and the networks. And we have shown that it's cost effective on mini grids. We can do a solar home system for less than $300 that can cook. Thank you very much. Bit rushed towards the end, but appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think, yeah, we could easily spend another few minutes, and I think there will be opportunity to discuss this a bit further in the Q&A discussion section of our workshop. Thanks a lot. I mean, the benefits are clear and the opportunities for people, planet, but also utilities, indeed, and businesses at large. Appliances that you may referenced, the EPCs, the electric pressure cookers, induction stoves, those combined with digitalization and data will certainly help, we hope, drive this sector forward fast. But now we're well on time, so that as a moderator makes me really happy, of course. But we don't want to stay here. We'll move on now, and we'll move on to hear what the private sector has to tell us. So Ben Jeffries, he's the CEO of ATEC, and been in this space for a while and delivering currently cost efficiency to households, data validated carbon credits to net zero partners, data for key stakeholders. Then you have a teams in Cambodia, in Bangladesh. You've been working and you are working on biogas solutions and induction stove solutions. And so with that short introduction, we will hear from Ben a bit more on data connectivity and innovation with a focus on e-cooking again. So Ben, over to you.
Great, thanks, Mikhail, and thanks everyone. Appreciate the time to come and have a quick chat. I think we'll have a bit of a pivot from a presentation perspective because we'll move into sort of a bit more now, I think, on what we're doing as far as the private sector go on the ground. So I'm happy to sort of walk through this and go from there. I think one interesting point, and I think it links back to Yabe and Ronan and Simon as well, is from ATEC's perspective, we very much chose to move into electric cooking because we saw it as the highest potential for solving the clean cooking problem over the next 10, 20 years. So we originally started from biogas and moved into Paygo biogas, which we think still has a very good role to play in solving clean cooking. But we saw the potential of going, well, a combination of Paygo and carbon credits could really accelerate solving clean cooking and what is the best technology to achieve that. And we believe that to be electric cooking. We have induction. EPCs are great as well, as Simon has mentioned too. So I'll take you through that. Now, as far as what we're doing, so we talk more broadly, and I think this ties into what we were saying as well about decarbonising cooking, about getting it to sustainable, environmentally sustainable solutions. And we think electric cooking is probably the most scalable solution for that. But the data can play a really pivotal role here in achieving that goal of universal access to clean modern cooking. And it really comes across 3 points, which I'm going to cover on today. One is around the user interface and payments, which is PAYGO. The second is around carbon credits. And the third is actually working with utility providers. So I'll just touch on those three specific today. So just quickly on eCook, which is our product range, which is electromagnetic induction. These are high efficiency, which then means low running cost devices for people to be able to use when they've got the grid connection. So these are grid connected devices, but in countries like Cambodia and Bangladesh, where we do the majority of our work currently, we are expanding across Asia and Africa. But in Cambodia and Bangladesh, you're looking at very high penetration of grid connectivity in those countries, and it's only going to be getting better. As Simon mentioned, there is a very substantial investment in effectively the fuel supply lines for cooking, which is electricity. So it really is a good time to capitalize on that opportunity. So what's unique about the design of our stoves is it's not just an induction stove, but it's also a SIM card connected IoT device. And I'll talk a bit about what that does as far as the value add that brings. So it is effectively, some people would call it an IoT device, some people call it a smart device. It's all basically the same thing. It means you have a live and active data connection to the stove. So ours done through a global GSM SIM card rather than Bluetooth, which we think is, given the markets we're working in, the best solution. So we have a double stove and a single stove. I'll just share a couple of pictures here. So this is one from some photos in Cambodia are being used, more on professional photo shoot. This is from Bangladesh, where we've also been installing the systems, and we see demand across both urban and rural areas for these products. So I'll give you here, this is one of the advantages of having that data connectivity is you can start to track where and how the systems are being used. So these are currently the systems across the world. We have active GPS locations on every system across the world. And if we zoom in a little bit, for example, here is the GPS locations of all the current eCook stoves in Bangladesh. So we've got a few thousand already in Bangladesh, also in Cambodia. We're seeing a very rapid uptake and high demand for the product in both markets as people get the grid. So I'll just talk through now a bit of, okay, well, what does this IoT or data connectivity bring to the mix? And we think there's really three factors that mean that really electric cooking is what we call the end game for solving the clean cooking problem. It is the highest efficiency, safest, most modern, and most cost-effective solution. We just got to work out how to get it to the customers in the best way possible. So the first option of what electric cooking does is by having that data connection, you can actually integrate PAYGO payments. So we sell our single and double stoves for as little as $5 a month to customers to be able to enjoy modern, clean, and safe cooking. And we're just working at the moment with the GSM Foundation, actually launching, this is actually an app from Australia, but we'll do something very similar later this year, an app interface where people can track their daily electricity usage. And we see this as really important for users because they're wanting to know, okay, well, I really like electric cooking, but there's that perception that it's expensive. But that is just not the case with high efficiency, be it EPCs or induction. It's actually very energy efficient. And typically we see about half the running cost of, say, LPG or charcoal in most markets. So it's about getting that data to people so that they can adopt the technology as quickly as possible. So that's kind of like advantage number one of the data connectivity. Advantage number two is actually we can then aggregate that data together. You saw the GPS, here's some usage data that people can use. This is great for us for being able to monitor and track usage and also predict payments, customer payment issues as well. But what we see as a big area we're going to be developing is being able to pull this data together and then share that with utility providers and really start to bring on utility providers, grid utility providers as a key stakeholder in the distribution and uptake of electric cooking. We think that's a huge opportunity moving forward, and we think our product is well placed for that, given these guys are very excited about electric cooking, but are also quite nervous about grid load, about blackouts, and about peak load management. And what our device does is the ability to be able to separate out the electricity consumption from cooking from the rest of the household use. And then they can start to look at incentives for off-peak use, etc., to spread the load out. And through that, they can monitor that at a very accurate level. We've seen a similar problem in Australia, where I'm from, around solar and input solar into the grid. And this, I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day, and he was saying this: if he could have this on how solar is operating independently from the grid, it'd be a huge value to grid providers in grid load management as well. So we think that's a very unique sort of feature that we can continue to work with grid providers on. And then the third component, which we're going through now, is doing data validated carbon credits. And for us, this is a very exciting area. We think this is where the market's going to go in the future globally, is that really that a data-based carbon credit is going to have the highest level of trust and verification that the credits are actually being achieved. So for us, this is a great way to go. It also means that we can do it at a higher scale with lower cost and quicker turnaround of credits as well, which means we can pass as much of this value through to households as possible. And really, that's the goal I think us as a sector need to look at, is getting high quality solutions into households, but at very sort of cost effective prices. That means that they're able to get a modern cooking experience without that high cost, which then has the benefit of helping the environment and helping companies to achieve net zero as well. Cool. So I think that's about it from me. I think I'm a couple of minutes ahead of time. So yeah, I'm happy to wrap up there and give a bit of extra time for questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. High quality, cost effectiveness, digitalization, data, driving decision makings, not only at the government level, but certainly helping make the case for the household transition. Very interesting, very interesting slides there. Thanks, Ben. Moving on now to my good colleague Nicolina Lindblad from Sustainable Energy for All. She joined us a few months ago as in the integrated energy access planning team, and being an energy planning specialist herself, she will now speak to us a bit and share a few slides on what the integrated energy access planning approach and the tool that we at SEforALL have been working on, and how do we make sure that we don't leave clean cooking behind in the planning approaches. So with that, Nicolina, over to you.
Thank you very much. I believe I'm audible. So good morning, good afternoon. My name is Nicolina Lindblad, as mentioned, and I'm an energy planning specialist with SEforALL. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel, and I look forward to a very interesting discussion. I feel honored to join this eminent panel of speakers and experts in the clean cooking field, and I hope that with my background in electricity access planning and geospatial energy modeling, I can provide some insights on how geospatial data and analytics can also help inform the clean cooking sector. There we go. So I will just start with providing a very basic background on GIS, or Geographic Information System, which allows us to manage, analyze, and map all types of data. Basically, it allows us to attribute any type of data and integration of location data, where things are, with all types of descriptive information, how things are there in that location. This provides us a foundation for mapping and analysis. GIS helps us understand trends, relationships, and geographic context. These benefits include enhancing communication and efficiency, as well as better management and decision making. So basically, GIS enables us the layering of maps and other data layers that help us understand multidimensional problems. It allows us to process extensive amount of data and visualize it in a comprehensive manner. So to address the question previously posted on how GIS is useful for energy and conceptualize GIS from an energy perspective, what you see here on the left on the screen is a subset of the layers that informed the least cost electrification assessment of which you see the outputs on the right, as part of the integrated energy plan in Nigeria that Simon briefly mentioned also earlier. This GIS-based assessment enabled us to provide an informed pathway for Nigeria on how they should address SDG 7.1, namely access to electricity for all, and to do so in the most resource-efficient manner by 2030. So when can GIS data and analytics be useful? I would want to answer any time when you are processing data that in one way or another is location specific, and or when you are dealing with multidimensional issues, as GIS allows us to attribute any amount of data to just one single known location. And that single known location could be, for instance, that smart meter location that was just mentioned in the previous intervention. So zooming to Manila, since that is our current, at least virtual location, to exemplify how GIS can be useful for clean cooking. If you are, for instance, interested in how you can transition from LPG to e-cooking in light of spiking LPG prices, you may start by first looking at the population distribution and density in that area to identify larger pockets of customers. Secondly, you may overlay that with the grid infrastructure in the area to understand the potential for grid supplied electricity. Finally, you may add the location of the LPG terminals attributed with their local market price for LPG. And I mean, understandably, this is just a very much simplified model, but this very quick example provides the starting point for an informed assessment on the cost implications of such transition from LPG to e-cooking. So moving over to the integrated energy planning, the IEP, that was previously mentioned and developed for Nigeria as an example. So the integrated energy planning makes us enable the use of geospatial data and analytics to provide policymakers an easy, relatively low cost and visually powerful way of identifying the optimal mix of technologies to achieve universal energy access in a modular way. This means that in addition to the traditional electricity access assessments, components of clean cooking and, for instance, cold chain for vaccine distribution can be added. And other past assessments and projects that have been done in the country can be leveraged and integrated to this integrated framework, all to assure a holistic approach. It also facilitates problem solving and makes it possible to explore linkages, evaluate trade-offs, and compare the consequences of different energy decisions. So just to provide some more insights on how the clean cooking component of the IEP, of the process of developing it could look like. So first, starting by defining the base layer for analysis, by identifying settlements with limited access to clean cooking. Secondly, estimate the household's cooking energy consumption by estimating the cooking intensity of households and associated energy consumption. Thirdly, estimate the opportunity for expansions of clean cooking solution by determining the number of households that can afford a clean cooking solution in each settlement, and then how many of those that are likely to adopt to clean cooking solutions in each of these settlements based on a proxy of the female adult educational level. And then finally, identify the settlements that are sufficient, that has sufficient crop waste for biogas production. And the final step is defining the infrastructure required to realize opportunity by determining the number and placement of LPG distribution infrastructure, bottling plants, skids, MDCs to serve associated demand, determine electricity access gap for e-cooking, and then finally determining the number and placement of biodigesters to serve demand. So just to give you some snapshots from the Nigeria IEP, some of the images you may recall from Simon's intervention. But just here on the left, you can see the business or the current stage as we started the assessment in Nigeria, where in yellow you can see where the usage of emission-intensive cooking is used, and then in blue where clean cooking is currently available. And then on your right, you could see what the potential for clean cooking solutions could be. The slides will be shared so you can unpack the details in due time. And also, I just wanted to show this final map as well to show how visually perhaps it may not look like the impact of integrating cooking demand into the electricity demand may impact to that large extent. But if you start to unpack the insights here, you see that 112,000 settlements, so settlement is similar as a community, would need an upgrade in their mini-grid system to cover for that increase in demand. So insights like this have major implications naturally on the ground. And then I just wanted to sort of end with saying, so I mean, yeah, GIS and geospatial analytics and data sounds like a great thing, but what is the downside of it? Because otherwise probably everyone would be doing it, and that's not the case. So one of the major constraints is the lack of access to data, and I refer to access to data rather than lack of data, because we do produce a lot of data, and a lot of data is available, but it's just not reaching the people that need it. So that together with yeah, I will pause there and then just say that this sort of speaks to the importance of organizations like SEforALL, SMAP, World Bank, CCA, and others, that we play a critical role in increasing access to and capacity around the use of GIS data and analytics. And we need to advocate for open access to data and zoom out of our specific fields and current projects and the primary use of the data that we may have collected under that project, and ask ourselves, what could be the reuse of the data? In other words, who could also benefit from the data that I just collected under my project, and then take the appropriate measures to assure that there is a proper access to that data, preferably by publishing them, for instance, on a centralized locations, if there is, for instance, a centralized data repository in that country that you are working with, or alternatively, the World Bank / SMAP's energydata.info or humanitarian data exchange that are also examples of centralized platforms to assure the broadest outreach. Just to finish up this, if you scan a QR code, you get the direct link to the Nigeria IP. If you and you feel welcome to explore that, it's publicly available, and that is part of our trying to make more data and analytics available. So that's all from me. Thank you very much, and please feel free to reach out for any further comments and questions past this as well.
Very good. Thank you, Nicolina. And a big thank you to all the presenters, in fact. And I have now the pleasure that we're perfectly on time and have now a good 20 minutes to answer questions and have a discussion a bit. And Nicolina, I'm wondering, given that your microphone is, so to say, warm there, and if you could just, for the private sector audience, just highlight once more how the integrated energy access planning tool, like how can they make use of it in a country like Nigeria? What's the opportunity for them to make use of that visualization and data that is made available?
Thank you for that question. So, I mean, we all know that the private sector plays a very critical role in addressing SDG 7. So that with that in mind, throughout the development of the IP, we work closely with the private sector to firstly assure that the IP is built on intelligence from the local market and on the ground. so that it would indeed be helpful for the private sector in the end. But then, like fast forwarding to the dissemination of the results, as I mentioned earlier, the platform is made publicly available so that everyone can use it. And for instance, if a local mini-grid provider or solar home system or an international investor for that matter that are interested in that market, they can use the platform to filter out suitable locations for investments. So for instance, a community that has sufficient demand for a mini-grid system, or a lower demand region that would be suitable for a solar home system solution, maybe paired with an e-cooking solution. So that could be one option. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicolina. Thank you. And indeed, as Nicolina pointed out, that tool is available on the website. So please do visit it. Looking at the questions from the audience, Ronan, there was one for you. And the question was around on that slide, which showed the investments in the 7 companies, or the largest share of the investments going into the 7 companies. So the question is, what technology fuel breakdown were those investments in? Ronan.
Right, yeah, thank you for the question. It's an interesting one. That is a difficult thing to answer, and it's a difficult thing to answer because of the second trend that I pointed to, which is companies like ATEC that are diversifying from one product to others. It's not always possible for CCA to say of the investment that's going into these companies, especially those that are diversifying across product lines. Therefore, what's the representation, if you like, of the capital by product type? So we produced that analysis in our previous report, and we found that we weren't able to faithfully reproduce that analysis this time. The analysis that we showed last time, again, was dominated by that really large deal in 2019, which went into an LPG company. So just looking at that, you would see LPG dominate. I think if you were to look at the analysis for 2020, it would show ethanol dominating. So I think it varies year on year based on who's going through a fundraising cycle, right? So it's difficult to draw snap conclusions, or you shouldn't draw snap conclusions based on just 1 year. But I think taking those 2 years together, there is a trend there around how that particular LPG company, that particular ethanol company are serving urban customers. And I think that there is a trend there that when you look at the split of capital going into technologies by the customers that they typically serve, more than half of the capital has gone into companies over the past 2 years that have just urban customers. And there's good reasons for that around, higher disposable income in urban settings, better unit logistics costs for serving those customers. So there's good reason for that. But
Ronan, just moving on a bit, looking at the carbon finance that has come across in many of the presentation and the opportunity it presents. So what would you want to tell an entrepreneur scratching his or her head at the moment and thinking, is it hard to access that carbon finance, those streams of revenue to make your business sustainable? Is there a magic wand, so to say, to access those quickly?
I don't think there is a magic one to get those quickly at the moment. It is there is a onerous reporting to set yourself up to get that. Perhaps onerous actually is the wrong word, right? There needs to be in order for carbon credits to have any value in terms of what they're ultimately trying to do in terms of taking carbon out of the atmosphere. They need to be believable. So there is a balance there between the monitoring, reporting, verification requirements for a trustworthy carbon credit, which the buyer wants and is prepared to pay a premium for because it's a high quality carbon credit, and the burden of reporting that puts on the enterprise. And I think at the moment it's the preserve of larger players, that can afford to do the MRV side of carbon. I think that there is innovation going on at the moment, though, that is moving us away from the kind of the field-based survey techniques of validating usage, which then feeds through into carbon credits towards that real-time data used for monitoring. So I think if there was an answer, it would be put faith in data and generating that data on your customers and usage. And to be honest, you'll find that useful for other purposes too, in terms of customer uptake and satisfaction and customer service. And it could be a bit of a win-win there.
Perfect. No, thanks, Ronan. And on that customer uptake element, I'm wondering, Ben, if you had any good practices to share with the audience on raising awareness and driving that household demand and transition to clean cooking solutions. And if you had, Ben, any recommendations in terms of that awareness raising and transition.
Yeah, it's a well-timed question, because we just did a piece of work with MEX in Cambodia, testing different channels around behavior change. So that's going to be published probably in the next few weeks, hopefully. We'll be sharing that report. But to give it just a general overview, what we've seen is overwhelmingly that the most influential channel for behavior change now is digital. Well, I'd say probably two things: digital and actually seeing, touching, feeling, having the product in your hand. I would say are the two most influential. So we tried a variety of different channels. We looked at some TV and other things as well. And while it was good, we didn't see the needle move much with that. However, on the digital side, particularly through sort of more advanced digital marketing strategies around, say, sort of using Facebook Ads Manager, Google AdWords, around targeting specific people with key messages, really led through to the best results overall. And it's not surprising. I mean, that's where marketing has gone in most developed nations. And we now have, like, for example, in Cambodia, more smartphones than people. So the penetration of smartphones in these markets now is just phenomenal, and it's where people go to for information, and it's predominantly through social media channels where they're spending their time. So I think hands down, that's the best way to be able to get to people, and it's by far the most cost effective as well.
Perfect. No, thanks, Ben, for that. Simon, in one of your slides, I mean, you were spotlighting the opportunity a bit in India, and I saw reference to a Go Electric campaign in India. I think was focusing on mobility, but I understand as well the e-cooking opportunity. Could you shed some more light on that, what the evidence shows in terms of a transition to e-cooking in India in particular?
So the Go Electric campaign is an interesting one in that it was planned to talk about the change in mobility. And of course, this is one thing that we haven't discussed, and I should always put in my slides, and I keep forgetting. There will be a transition to electric vehicles, and that will again be a prompt for strengthening the whole grid networks. And what we were able to do is to pivot the Go Electric campaign to be both mobility and e-cooking. So it's a national campaign. India is considering bulk purchasing of Indian-made energy-efficient electric appliances to strengthen the whole transition from their dependence on a fossil fuel in terms of LPG across to electricity. I am anticipating some of the audience saying, "Oh, but the Indian electrical grid is too coal-based, and it's not very clean." I acknowledge that, but in our drive towards net zero, somewhere around 2050, 2060, renewable energy is becoming cheaper and cheaper. It's already commercially very cost competitive with fossil fuel generation on the grid. So the grid will become cleaner. There is SDG 7.3 about energy efficiency. There will be same generation, but we'll use it more because we've made energy efficiency gains. And so in India, they're looking, the group that basically bought, I never quite remember whether it's 1 billion or 10 billion LED bulbs, but they managed to push the price from here down to here. EESL is the group, and they're looking to do the same thing with energy efficient appliances. And then the third aspect I would like to share is that some utilities, like the utility of Kolkata, are already thinking, we have all these customers, we have surplus demand, let's pivot them so that we can get improved revenues. So yeah, it's those discussions and those strategies are really beginning to take us to potential for scale that we haven't seen before.
Thank you. And moving on to Yabei, I mean, on the from the top-down planning tool that you presented, and given that energy security is making a lot of headlines, obviously today, are there some consideration in the planning tool that would help highlight those aspects as well? And a follow-up question that then would be that for governments and stakeholders wanting to make use of that tool that has just been launched, Yabei, is there some support from your team in helping deploy it, some technical assistance in helping make most of it, so to say?
Yes, thank you, Mikael, for the question. First, on the energy security, yes, we do recognize that each country have faced different resource constraints and maybe have their own comparative advantages for certain resources. And so in the planning tool, we have the function, okay, what's the fuel mix for modern cooking fuels? Because we know that we want to translate to universal access to modern cooking solutions, you have to switch modern fuel. And modern fuel that include, okay, LPG, gas, electricity, pellets, biogas, ethanol, different options. So currently in the tool, we have default fuel mix based on the current the country situation and some of indicators from the government side. But the planners, they can customize that fuel mix. So it's okay, I'm constraining the LPG import, can we increase the share of electricity? And how that would affect my overall costs, because there are costs implicated regarding, okay, downstream infrastructure cost, and then the fuel cost, and then household availability to pay, and then what the government needed financing to fill that affordability gap. Sorry, your second question is?
Just in terms of support from your team in the deployment of the planning tool, in case that's part of the program.
Yeah, so currently that the tool is available to everyone to explore, and it also includes detailed methodology. And our team is helping some of teams to develop basically the country engagement node that with the narrative, with data, and some of those information already fit into our, I don't know if many people know about this World Bank's products called the Country Climate and Development Report. It's basically overarching strategic document to engage with the top policymakers and the key stakeholders in the country. So often that when at a high level, if we're able to integrate clean cooking as part of energy planning, but also part of development and climate planning and decision-making process, that will be easier to develop relevant policies, programs, and mobilize investments. Again, I think right now it's really need to prioritize clean cooking as part of not the energy, but the overall development agenda.
Thanks, Yabei. Now moving on to, I'm looking at my notes here, perhaps Ronan, and then immediately after Nicolina. And that's on the gender aspects. And I was wondering, Ronan, in the industry snapshot report, if there are any trends that you were able to spot when it comes to opportunities to create, in particular, women-led businesses and employment opportunities for women in the broader value chains. And from that row, and then Nicolina, feel free to jump in and just perhaps emphasize one again what the gender lens is on the IEP tool that you have been working on.
Great, yeah, thanks, Mikael. Well, I start with the end user, right? The 4 million deaths that were referenced at the beginning of this presentation do fall disproportionately on women and children, the users and the gatherers of these dirty cooking methods. It was a interesting finding from the industry snapshot that 12% of the finance that came in 2020 was tagged as having a gender lens to it, so that it was either for a business because they're recognized as being key in advancing an equality agenda on gender, or because of the funding was specifically tagged to improving access for women. And I think that is a number that, now that we're tracking it, first we track it and then we can take action to increase that. I think there's a lot of headroom above 12%, so we'll be interested to see if that increases next year and subsequently. And did you want me to say a little bit about what CCA is doing in terms of gender, Mikael, or is that?
No, I think we might leave that to the next time, given that we're running out of time a bit. But perhaps follow up there, Nicolina, if you wanted just with a few words, just emphasize again the gender considerations, the gender lens that we have on the IEP tool.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, gender data was a key consideration for the calculations of adaptation to clean cooking solutions in the IEP. And that is based on the strong correlation between female educational rates and the likelihood for a household to adapt to a clean cooking solution. And I mean, this was enabled by the access to gender disaggregated data. So this again speaks to the importance of assuring that data is collected in a sort of a holistic manner and with a holistic approach. I mean, I know we are running out of time, but I was curious to hear, adding to that, when Ben, for instance, you are collecting the technical data and insights, if you're actually collecting any of the user data, and that could, for instance, be a gender tag. But I will not pose that as a question, but more as a comment that would be very useful. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Nicolina. And then moving to Ben quickly for another question. Just Ben, in 2030, where do you see yourself in terms of your business and geographies and solutions?
Yeah, well, Mikael, not a small question. So I'll give it a go. I'll take it on a slightly different trajectory, but I think it does answer your question. I was, telling my kids, I'm sure others have done this, about how we used to walk to a video store to select a video, take it home, put in a VHS player, pay a crazy amount of money, and now you just like switch on Netflix and can watch whatever you want. And I was explaining to my kids, and it's like, man, it was crazy back then, wasn't it? And I'm hoping that, be it 2030 or 2040, but when my kids have their own, that they'll turn around and say, hey, you know what's crazy? We used to cook with this open flame in the kitchen, and it was unsafe and it was just nuts. But now we've got all this modern electric stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I'm hoping that's what we can see, be it 10 years or 20 years for us to be able to transition across. Now, I mean, I'm confident. I mean, everything's going electric in the developed world. That's where it's going to go. What I say is the biggest thing that we need to invest in right now around solving clean cooking is actually grid development, because I was just in Nepal. I'm talking to people in Pakistan. They're like, wow, this product's fantastic. There's carbon credit opportunities there. But if we can't give people reliable access to electricity, so it's not just having the grid, but a reliable access, it's really going to hold back the uptake of modern electric cooking. So I think that's really, at a policy level, a really big focus area.
Thanks, Ben. And then we still have a few minutes, and I really want to turn now to our host, Dr. Nam, and the Asian Development Bank. Dr. Nam, you've heard a lot of interesting presentations here on a lot of data and evidence. Do you think that there's still something missing in terms of evidence in this space that would allow the Asian Development Bank to further prioritize clean cooking investment pipelines?
So,
And please go ahead, Dr. Nam.
no, thank you, Mikhail. This is the kind of, I think I mentioned that in the opening, that, we are early stage of that, where our focus is on the clean cooking. One of our focuses in addition to the other part. But as the others are also thinking that, we have to be careful with the cooking, and in particular, when we comes to everything to the e-cooking. Here we have to think about that, we have to consider with ADB DMCs, we have to see it first. In Europe, when I also from Europe, when I was 1980s, well, already we used the electric cooking system. I mean, even in Korea, as well as in Austria. Now, the reason is because electricity is relatively cheap in Europe, and Europe has electricity capacity access. Okay, so that's why that's different. So supply capacity is high. In terms of DMCs, that we have to say that here is excess demand capacity. Demand is much higher. Now we are talking about electricity access. It's not only the connected to electricity. What we are thinking is 7 by 24 hours, that access. How much of that is also we have to see it. Now you see a lot of DMC countries in the South, in Asia and the Pacific, per day, they are using 5 kilowatt hour. They are relatively medium term. If we use 2 kilowatt in addition for the cooking, that will be huge amount of electricity demand is required. Okay, so we have to say it's fine that if there is supply security challenges can be solved, that is the one way that we can do. And the other one is you see that in a lot of DMC countries that it is still even the decentralized grid, distributed systems, as well as grid, central grid. All this requires the huge amount of the work to be done in the next, which ADB is also looking at that, because it is not just the renewable capacity, is the supply capacity is coming in, but it requires the transfer T&D, the penetration rate has to be increased. So it is not only the rehabilitation, but it has to further expand that on that one, as well as distribution line. And then also the other thing is the source of the, all this energy level from primary resources to primary, secondary, final, and then energy services where the cooking is coming in. We have to see the whole fuel cycle, not the technology cycle, but we have to look into the fuel cycle. There might be also, we have to consider the, kind of the fossil fuel lock-in, because their power generation is still dominated by the fossil fuel. And even the IEA's projection, you see that it will be very, very limited if it comes to real green electricity in terms of renewables. So, that aspects that we have to look at it more about aspects in the more macro level. And what I think is that, it is a good presentation that we learned quite a lot, and, all this, experiences in business model. But there should be some kind of, phase by phase of changing that, to be implemented or deployed in the Asian DMCs, that how we can do. Definitely we will work with you all as a partner to, also we have to do it also knowledge product, as well as the, how we can do the pilot testing. And we have to see that, because, it is easy to say that, but it is different. Like in case of the Philippines, now because of the fuel price increase, the electricity price went up almost 50% on top over the last couple of months, right? So, we have to also look into that one, how we can convince. So it is not, always I'm an economist, energy economist. We always look at that, levelized cost, but this levelized cost is different country by country. So, so there are a lot of things that, remaining in our part that we have to work closely and work together. But one thing is clear, that, for the sake that, we have to have the, access to the clean cooking. And then also, there should be some kind of knowledge, and there should be something like this, some kind of a dissemination or a knowledge sharing event to be organized so that we can learn from each other. And that is the way that, ADB can really support also, through the investment in the, near future. So, at the moment, what we do from our side, from Energy Sector Group, we have a technical assistance program, new technical assistance program, which we focus quite a bit on the, kind of this knowledge pilot project, as well as pilot testing of a certain clean cooking, as well as some of this knowledge. So, we would definitely, yes. Okay.
No, thank you, Dr. Nam, and I'm sure that all the participants and the presenters today look forward to certainly working closely with you together. And I want to now wrap up. We're a bit over time, but just by saying a big thank you to ADB, certainly the ASEF team, the production team, all the speakers, and then a call to the audience to help us make sure that clean cooking is not left behind, and we put it at smack in the middle of all the agendas, and keep actioning those opportunities that are ahead of us. So with that, I wish you all a very good day, and speak to you soon and meet you in person, I hope, next year in Manila. Cheers. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.